Okay, we are live, and yeah, I was sharing in the chat the info of the previous session, which will continue today. And what we are going to do today is to continue talking about unit tests for blocks. So we started doing this diagram on the last session about testing blocks. And we mentioned that there are like two main ways of testing blocks in WordPress. One way of testing blocks is more centered in the unit. This is the block and the different parts of the block. This is we can test each function that is used by the block, but also more specifically about the React components involved in a block. We can test the edit component, we can test the save component, and we can test the registration component. For example, we can test that the block.json contains the metadata we need. We can test that the object returned when we register a block is the one we expect. We can also test that the render of the edit block behaves as is supposed to. We can also test that the markup returned by the save component is the one that is supposed to. So yeah, these are the type of things that we can test with unit tests in a way that we can check all of that automatically. So once we have all the tests, we can just launch a command and test all the things, all the tests that we have defined. We can start by having a look at the tests we created in the last session, and we can continue from there. So let me see if I can find the folder streams. Okay, I need to this and this window, I can put it here. Perfect. I'm going to make this font a bit bigger. So this is the repository I'm using to organize all the info for the streams. We have info for all the sessions, and we have also a projects folder. And in this projects folder, we have copyright date block with tests. To remember what we did in the other session, we started creating tests for this block, the block that is explained in the tutorial, Build Your First Block. This is a block that inserts the current year, that is automatically calculated depending on the year using native functions of JavaScript. And it also allows to optionally add a starting year. And we can select that year with a specific with a specific toggle that we have here. And also we can write the starting year we want. And this block is especially interesting because it contains logic to generate the markup. This is, it has a save function. So whenever we save the block, there is a specific markup stored in the database, but also there is a dynamic render defined for the block, in which logic is defined in the render PHP. So this render PHP will actually receive the markup stored that was generated from the save function, and it will return another thing. So it can modify that markup, or it can completely ignore that markup and generate a new one. But yeah, this is an interesting example, and we did some tests to check the behavior of the registration of this block and of the edit component of the block. So let's run those tests and let's review what we did. If we go to projects and then we go to copyright, okay, here if we check the package.json, I think I need to run the dependencies. Okay, and if I go to this is the package log, I want the package.json. Here I have test unit, so if I run npm run test unit, here we have the result of our tests. So as you can see, we can just run this command, and we can automatically run all the tests. So for example, we have created a block registration.test.js that is actually here, and what we've tested in this file is that the block should be properly registered. And in order to do that, we have used some internal functions that are used by WordPress in the process of registering the block for the block editor. So we are emulating that process and verifying that the block is going to return the expected data. For example, when we use create block with the metadata of the block, there's an object return that defines the block, and that object should contain some specific data. For example, the property name of that object should be the same than the name defined in the block.json. For block.json, use this one. So for example, this name should be also part of that object. We can run the let me see a quick way of doing this. I think that we can open Studio. We can can open Studio. We can, okay, let's create a new site for the streams demos. When I actually I want a custom domain stream demos. Save. Okay. With that, what I'm going to do is, so we have here a functional site that we can use to check our blog. Okay, site. What happened here? Maybe I need to restart this again. So I'm going to start this again and see what happens. Let's see what happens here. Okay, I'm going to stop this one, stream demos local. Super strange. This is super strange. The first time that happens this to me, and of course it had to happen in a live stream. Okay, let's do one thing. I'm going to remove the site. And, I'm going to stop this. Okay, remove. I'm going to create a new site. Stream demos. And starting. Perfect. It seems this had something to do with the future of the custom domain. So yeah, I need to check that, but I will do that later. So now we have our site. What I want to do is go into overview. I want to go to the terminal, and here we have access to the whole WordPress installation that has been used for our stream demos. And I'm going to go to the content folder, to the plugins folder, and I'm going to link this project, this folder, which is actually a plugin, into this folder, so I can use it from my new site. So this is something that I usually do. So if you have watched other streams, you have probably seen me doing this several times. So my streams folder is here. Here is the projects folder and the copyright. And what I'm going to do is to copy this and to put this here. what was the flag to check all the ls ls minus I'm inventing things. Okay, let's do one thing. What I can do is okay. What's the flag? What's the flag of the flag of the ls command to see all the details of the files? Cursor to the rescue. What's the flag? The flag, that one, LA. That was the one I was looking for. Sorry, LS. Yeah, and here we have the link, like the folder that properly links to that one. So now, if we open the admin side, and I should probably have already that here. Here we have copyrighted with block. We can activate that. And now the block is registered. And now I can insert the block. But what I can do is coming here and going back to our tests. And if we go back to our tests and we go to block registration, in theory, if we apply create block over the metadata block name, which in our case is this one, we should get an object with the following properties. We should get a property with we should get an object with a property name that should be the same of the name in the block.json, but also the attributes defined in the block.json, which are these ones, fallback, current year. They also should be in the object with undefined values because we haven't defined default values. So this is the test we are doing here. So let's check that. And the create block belongs to the blocks package, and in the editor we have all those packages injected in the global WP object. So we can do WP blocks create block, and the name of the block is this one. And WP is not defined. Okay, let me reload. It should definitely be defined. Yeah. So we can repeat this. And here we have the object. This is the object we are actually testing in our test. We are checking that when we create a block with our metadata, we receive the expected object. We are just checking a few things. For example, we are checking that the name, here is test. We are checking that the block name belongs to, that the block name is the same than the one in the metadata block name, but also that block attributes fallback current year is undefined. So we don't actually have we can, okay, what we can do is, I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to store this in a variable var const o copyright block. And now we can check that these are the tests that we are adding. This is true. And then so yeah, these tests are passing. Okay, then we can also create a block with some specific attributes, and so we can also emulate this. We can, yeah, let's create this. No, we can copy this. And what we can do is all copyright block with attributes, and we can create the block passing some attributes. Now, when we check this object, we can see that the attributes should have the specific values we have passed in the moment of the creation. Juanma, you look hot with your haircut. Thank you. I appreciate it. I also drink my beer. Okay. We were checking that the block, that the object returned by the create block, in this case when we pass attributes, the object contains these attributes, and this is actually what we are checking, what we are verifying in this test. We are testing that the attributes fall back current year to be the specific attributes that we have passed. So this is another behavior that we are checking. And then finally here, what we tested is just directly the block.json. We are just testing that the block.json contains the specific properties we need the block to have. For example, we are just testing that in the block.json of my block, there is the supports property defined with a color and the background. So we come here, we should have these supports. And someone may ask, okay, what's that thing of support? So these supports is what enable these settings in the sidebar. So if we come here, we have only available these settings because this is what we have defined in supports. So for example, we can only customize the color of the text and also the size. And these are the supports. For example, the background, we cannot customize it, and only the typography. Perfect. So that's one test, and the other one was a bit more complex. but a bit more interesting as well. Okay, let's go to our diagram. We have reviewed this. I'm going to put here and I want this to be, yeah. So registration done, and now we are going, no, we want to also test the edit. So now our blog, like a blog has, the blog has two main React components. Well, actually it's only one, it's the edit component, because the save component is just a function that returns some markup. But the edit component is the React component that is rendered in the block editor. So this is a React component. And if we come here, we can see that this component, as you can see, it like the block editor is just a big React application, and it reacts to changes that happens in the state of the application. That's why each block has an edit component that is a React component, and that React component is the one that is rendered to represent that block in the block editor. So we can also test that React component. We can also test this edit component. As a React component, this edit component can be rendered and also receives some props. So we can check different things. We can check that the components that are part of this React component are also rendered. So let's check what we tested. Edit component. Okay, and there's one thing we need to do with the tests. Is that when we, well, I forgot to say as a reminder that we are testing this with a Jest, but we don't need to do anything super special because the WP scripts package already includes the the internal, all the utilities we need to run tests with Jest. So here, we can just run WP scripts test unit.js, and this automatically is going to look for any .test.js files, and it's going to run them. Okay, and it's going to run those tests with Jest. Jest, Jest. Here, this in React apps. Jest. Jest. Okay, guides. Snapshot testing. Yeah, there are like several things that we can use in unit tests that are run with Jest. One thing that we can do is to create mocks, but let's go to our edit component. What we are testing here is we are importing our edit component, and we are using the render function. We are actually rendering our edit component to check that the behavior is the one we expect. So we are testing manually that the render, the information that is rendered in the block editor is the one that is supposed to have. This render method is something available in this testing library React, which is something that we need to install. So Jest is a testing framework, but in order to test React components, there are some additional libraries that we need to add. In this case, this testing library React. Okay. So, okay, we were here in the edit component and we were checking what we are testing. So coming back to our original edit component, we can see here that the edit component receives some props, receives some attributes from those props. It generates it calculates the current year using the native date class. Then okay, this use effect is run every time there is a change of the attributes. So if the current year is not a fallback current year, and by default they are undefined. So current year in this case is, let's go to the block.json, block.json and then the edit. Okay, let me open this in split right, and I'm going to hide this. Perfect. Okay, so we have current year that we calculated. For example, if we run this right now, this will be 2025. Because if 2025 is different than the fallback current year, and fallback current year is something that we are passing as an attribute. If the attribute is not defined, by default, whenever we render this edit component, there will be a default value assigned to the fallback current year. So if it's not defined, it will be defined here in the React component. So fallback current year, it will never be undefined. It will never be empty. And then the display date, we check if the attributes show a starting year and a starting year are defined. The first one is a boolean and the second one is a string, but if it's defined, this generates a true. If they are defined, display date is a starting year plus the current year. If not, we only display the current year. And this is the logic that we have here. Because we are not passing, we are not switching on this switch. The value right now is false. So in our case, it's not passing here. That's why we are only displaying current year. If we come here, we show a starting year and we then this is displayed. And as you can see, every time that I type the React component, it reacts to this change. And then also we are rendering some inspector controls. The inspector controls are these elements here that we are using to allow the user to enter the information related to the block. And we do that with inspector controls and using panel body, which is this component that allows you to include some other components. Toggle control is this one. And as you can see, if whenever we switch, the show starting year is set to true, and we are doing this here. Whenever it's true, the React component will display this text control. So there are several things that we can test here, and let's go back to the test we started and let's see what we did. So we are passing some specific props. If we go to our edit component, we can actually display in the console the props that are received by this React component. So let's go here. I'm going to save this. What do you mean that my site doesn't? Plugins. I think that we have. What have we? The edit.js. We have only added this console log. This should work. Okay. You know what's happening is because because we're using a build process, and when every time we're using a build process, the React component, the code that is actually used in the block editor is not the one in the src folder, is the one in the build folder. Because we have made this change and we have not regenerated the build folder, we don't see the console log. So we need to run our process to generate the build folder with our updated code. Okay. Now we can see what the edit component receives, and this is one of the things that we are going to check, that the props. Well, no. What we're going to do is play a little bit with these props that we pass to the React component, to the edit React component, and verify what's the behavior of the component when we render it. Okay, and that's what we are testing here. We are here mocking these props. We are passing these specific props. We are passing some attributes. We are passing a set attributes, and here we're using Jest.fn. Jest.fn generates a function that is what is called a spy function or a mock function that it will allow us to check. So set attributes, it will be a special function that can be called, but it will keep track of the calls. So we can verify if set attributes have been called. We can verify set attributes have been called with some specific values, how many times have been called. So we can test those type of things. And we can do that by, instead of passing the original set attributes, we are passing a set attributes that is going to be equal to our spy function. Then we have a client ID and a class name. So these are the mock edit props that we will use to render or edit component. Okay. Another interesting concept is the concept of snapshot. So whenever we run the edit component, whenever we render the edit component with some specific props, there is a markup return, and we can capture that in the form of a snapshot. So with Jest, we can, well, with Jest and the testing library React, we can compare that snapshot that is returned by the React component with an expected one. And we can do that with the to match snapshot. So the way it works is that the first time we run to match a snapshot, there's a snapshot generated, and that snapshot is stored here. Edit component test snap. The second time, the snapshot that is generated will be compared to the one that we have in the snapshots folder. So we can store like these snapshots of the React component, and we can compare the current output with the one that we have previously registered as a good one. In case that we modify the return of React component, this component will fail. So what we can do is to regenerate the snapshots, so we can update what we want to be the snapshot reference, the snapshot we want to use as a reference. Okay, so we are testing that. Then we are also testing that the returned values contain this when we pass these props. And then we are also testing that the component inspector controls is in the document. Okay. And how are we doing this? Because one thing that we are doing is whenever we render this, take into account that this component is importing a lot of libraries, and we need to mock these libraries. So whenever this component is rendered, it uses our own versions of these components, because we are not interested in the behavior of these components. We are just interested in checking if those components are loaded, because those components should have their own tests. But for the sake of testing our component, we are just interested in checking if they are displayed in the layout, in the block editor. So what we can do, we can mock these components, and we do that by creating a mocks folder that replicates this structure. So mocks WordPress components will be loaded whenever the test finds this import. So instead of importing the WordPress components that is in the node modus, it will load the WordPress components that is here. And here we are redefining these components with a much simpler version. As you can see, panel body, text control, and toggle control, they are just like very simple React components with a data test ID. This data test ID is the one that we can test then with the get by test ID. So very simple components. Then the blockator is the one that contains inspector controls. So we are redefining inspector controls with a very simple React component that just contains this data test ID. So in our case, in our test, this test, it's just checking that the component loads the inspector controls properly. And so this part of the component works properly. So it loads properly inspector controls. Okay. So what we can do from here? What we can do from here is to continue adding tests. For example, what we can do is to also test that these components are loaded. In order to do that, we need to improve our inspector or mocked inspector controls. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to allow this component to receive a children attribute of the props. This children is this. Everything that is inside this component is received in the prop subject as a children attribute. So we are going to prepare our mocked component to receive this. And we are allow our mocked component to render the children. So now our test, we can actually test if the panel body, toggle control, and text control here are being rendered. And we can check, for example, this logic that when we show a starting year is true, text control is rendered, and if it's false, it's not rendered. We can test things like that. Okay, so let's do that. Okay. So if we come here to our edit component, renders, inspector controls. And what we can do here is to group a set of tests under a settings panel. Okay. Okay. We can check that it renders panel body, and it should work because whenever we render edit, because we have modified the here our inspector controls. Now the edit component is going to also render panel body, and panel body we also need to do the same. So panel body, we need to panel body, we receive a title. So what we can do with panel body is allow him to receive title and children, and we can test. Yes, that's enough. We can check that the title is this one. So we can check that the element with the ID panel body exists, and also we can check that the component has a specific title. We can do that. Just to verify, what we're verifying here is that the component is properly receiving via props the title we pass here. Great. So it renders panel body with correct title, and we can check that here. Well, actually, if this is if this test passes, that means that this also passes. But for the sake of being more clear, I'm going to leave the two of them. Maybe in a production environment, I mean, in a real life environment, we could maybe avoid this test. Okay, so I'm going to run npm run test unit. Okay, because we are in streams and we need to go to projects, copyright with tests, and here is where I'm going to run this. Okay, there's some error, and it says okay, the snapshot fails. Why is failing the snapshot? Because we have modified the internal structure of the mocked component. So the current output is different than the one we have here registered. So what we have to do is to update the snapshots. So let me see snapshots. How can we actually how can we snapshot format changes? No, I want to check how can I snapshot updates. Yeah, is with the okay, let me see. Okay, what we can do is to use we can update the snapshot, or we can do two things. We can just remove this folder, and now, because there is no preference, the first time is going to recreate the snapshot. So we can come here, and now it passes. The snapshot is generated, regenerated, and now it's different than the other one. I don't know if you remember the other one, but it was much simpler. Actually, we have the other one in the repository. So if we go to the streams and the projects folder, and we go here and test, the snapshots are usually tracked via the Git repository because they are used in the tests. So if we check this test, you can see that it's very simple, but now, and in fact, this inspector controls is just this component because we didn't have the children thing, but now our test, it contains the children. And the panel body also contains the children. So we can check that this panel body exists and the toggle control exists. So what we can see here is that the panel body is not this is the test that is failing. We can check. I'm going to clear this. Let's remove this. And let's run the tests. Edit component, they are all failing because it starts with the match snapshot, and everything else is failing because the snapshot is different. And why is that? So let's see. Why is that? The main thing is that the title like this here, the snapshot. Yeah, here we should have, I don't know why we are not having that. We should have this. And we are not getting this. So let's see why we are not having that. Okay, I know what's happening here. The thing is that the edit component, this one, yeah, is passing this. Okay, so for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to remove this and also this. And now it should work. I'm going to remove the snapshots again. Okay, data title now it works properly, but we're having some issues here. Expect okay. What we can do here is to isolate the tests. So let's focus on just one test and let's go from there. So in order to do that, we can come here and I think is only. And well, we are only executing this one, but also, okay, let me think. I think that we can do, I think that we can run a specific test by passing how can I run I think that we can just pass can just pass yeah. And now what we can do is to just say that from this file, we just want to run this one. Okay, I'm going to remove this. Okay, let's see. See what happens here. So it's an expected mock function not to be called. So the issue is with the console log. So the test is having an issue with the console log because of some, okay, so let's go to our code. And let's go to the edit.js. We can remove this because we don't need it anymore. Perfect. So now it passes. Let's check if we remove this. All the tests should run. They all pass. And if I remove the path, all the tests from, okay, they are passing now. Perfect. So we are progressing. What else we can do? Okay, the thing is that we solved this, but yeah, this should be. So the issue is with the this function, this internationalization function. Now npm, now the tests will fail. Yeah, because the snapshot is not properly generated because of that. So if we run this, the title is not properly generated and we are not having the title. Why is that? Because our mocked function is not working as expected. So what we can do is check what this function, what our mocked function is doing. Okay, so we are using Jest FN. This is interesting when we are only interested in checking the if the function has been called or the attributes has been called with, the arguments has been called with. But what we really need to do here is to create a function that receives some text and return some text. Because here or edit component, we are interested in a function that we are only interested in this argument, and we want that this just returns this. And with that, we need to remove this to regenerate. But another way of doing this is to, I don't know if I have this in the, no, I don't have it. I don't have any flag. Yeah, we can. What we can do is to use this flag, update snapshot. This should update the snapshot with the latest version. The latest version that includes our mocked version of this internationalization function. So now, if we run this, they passed. And now if we check the snapshots, we can see that data title is properly returned using the function that we are interested in. So perfect. We have solved that issue. And we can test more things here, but I think that we have enough. Another thing that we can check is that, for example, because this component only appears when show starting year is true, and show starting year is an attribute that can be passed via props. What we can check is that if we pass a starting year, if show starting year is true, then this component is displayed. And we are only interested in checking if a component with the ID, which is our mock here, test ID text control is displayed. So we can check. It renders text control. It renders text control if show starting year is true. Okay. So what we can do is we can create a mock edit props with a starting year. Okay. What I want to do is not to alter this one we have as a reference because we don't want to affect the other test. So what we can do is to yeah, we want to do this. We want to create another copy that used all the properties of mock edit props, but show a starting year instead of being false. We want it to be true. Yeah, that's what we want. That's the difference. When we pass these props in the render, then the component with the ID text control should be displayed. And we can test this. Mock edit pro is not defined. Const. Okay, perfect. What we can also check is that when a starting year is false, which is the false renders maybe we can add here another test. Doesn't render text control if show is false. We can add as many tests as we want. So we are going to mock edit props. So when show starting year is false, text control shouldn't be in the document. Okay. What's happening here? Unable to find an element by text control. Okay. So, okay, expect get by test ID. How do we console log unable to find an element? Let me see the documentation. Get by test ID. Get by test ID, testing library. Get by text ID. Get by text queries advanced. Okay, let's ask cursor. How can I check if the element with test ID prop equal to is not in the document? The following doesn't work. Query. Interesting. Yeah, exactly. This is what's happening. The issue is that get by test ID will throw an error if it does not find the element. Exactly, that's what we're getting. So the test will fail before it even gets to the assertion. Exactly. So to check that an element is not in the document, you should use query by test ID instead, which returns null if the element is not found. So is this. Great. Thank you, Cursor. One failed. Okay, what's happening now? Okay, query by test ID is not defined. Okay, let me see. Query by test ID is not defined. Yeah. Okay. Because all these functions are being returned by the render. So what I'm doing here is destructuring the function that I'm interested in. So yeah, we need to destructure query by test ID instead of get by test ID. Okay, and now they run. Perfect. So yeah, there are a lot of things that we can check, but let's jump to the save component, because this is another interesting one. So what we can do is to create a file called save component. Save function to be .js, because this is not being rendered anywhere. It's just this function is only being used to generate markup that is going to be stored in the database. So save function test.js. And what we can do is describe save function. It returns let's check the save function and let's see. And here we have okay, accept. We have removed all the comments. Okay, so what we are doing, just summarizing a little bit, what we are doing is we are testing the block that is explained here in the tutorial. Build your first block. I'm going to pass this in the chat. So I have passed the link to this tutorial in the chat. This is the block that we are testing, and any block has like two main components that are the edit and the, well, actually the React component is the edit one, then the save is a function that returns some markup, and then there's a registration process in the block editor involved. So we have defined some tests to check that the registration process works as expected. So in other words, the registration process with the metadata of the block works as expected. There is an object returned, and we are verifying that the properties of that object are the ones that we expect. Then there is an edit component involved, and we are testing that the render of this edit component is behaving as is expected to. And here we have the edit component, and for example, we are testing things such as that it matches a snapshot. The unit tests with Jest, and more specifically with React components, we can use a thing called Snapshot that is like a photograph of the rendered output of a component. We can store that, and that snapshot is automatically generated, but we can add it to Git. So this is like the reference output of the React component, and we can compare every time that the output of the component is always the one we expect it to have. And we do that with the to match snapshot assertion. Then we can also test things like, by default, this year should be in the document. And actually, we haven't explained this earlier, but internally the edit component is using this logic: current year, new date, get full year. So every time the edit component is rendered, there is a calculation of the current year, but we are mocking that logic because this will change from year to year, and we want to ensure that we have always the same value, because we need to work with the same values. So what we are doing is we are creating our own version of the date class for the tests, and we store the global date in a variable. Before we launch every test, we replace that native version of date with our own version of date, and that version of date, every time we execute get full year, we return the same value, and after each test we return global date to its original functionality, the original class. That's why this test works. But what we are actually testing here is that this functionality works, and the current year, the value of current year that is used here, here, and here, and display date is used here. It works as expected. Okay, and now we want to test the save function test. And the save function test, we can see that it receives some attributes. If fallback current year is not defined, it will return null. Why? Because that means that something is not working properly, because fallback current year should always have a value, because in the edit fallback current year we are always assigning a default value. If it's passed via props, we assign that value, but if not, we use the current year. So, but we can test that this works as expected. And then we have display date. That is the same logic we are using here. This one, yeah, it's the same logic. So the markup stored in the database, this is the markup stored. It will return just 1 year or 2 years, depending if we have show starting year, which is a boolean that will be true or false, and then starting year is a string with the current year we want to show at the beginning. So if this condition fails, we will just display the fallback current year, but if it evaluates to true, display date will have the starting year plus the fallback current year. So let's start testing things here. The first thing that we need to do in the save function is to import the save function. We can also import the render. I'm going to, so technically this is not a React component in the sense that it's not being used to be rendered anywhere, but the structure replicates a React component, and we can use the render function to check the output. So yeah, I'm going to call this again save component. Okay, so save component, we can test this thing, that it returns null when fallback current year is not provided. So what we can do is returns null if fallback current year is not set. Perfect. And here what we need to test props. So the render, let me see in the edit component. Yeah, the container is actually the markup that is returned by this render. So we can check that the markup return. Let me see console log what this container contains exactly. We can just run this by putting only here, and what we can do here is npm run test unit. Okay. Well, this is failing, so that's why. But it says expect received. Test props. Yeah, no, we need to, let me see, save attributes. Okay, let's props attributes. Okay, let's do one thing, because I think this is more, instead of doing this, what we're going to do is to call this with test props is an object with an attributes, with test props. Yeah. Perfect. I think this is what we have to do. With the save, should return null when fallback current year is empty. And we can test things in this way, and we can remove this render because we can actually test things with this this function. Then we can also, for example, we can it should displays current year, displays only current year if when show start current year, when show starting year is false. So in the logic, when show starting year is false, then display date will be fallback current year. So if we pass fallback current year 2024 and show starting year false, the result should be this. Maybe we can add a regular expression, but I think this will pass. No, it doesn't pass. Why? Because block editor use block props save is not a function. Okay, so we are using this here, use blocks prop save. Okay, so what we need to do here is to because use block props save is not defined. Or what does it say? It's not a function. I think we haven't defined that here. Yeah. So what we need to do is to define it, and we are going to define. We could do this. We could define this here, but yeah, let's do this for now. And now Okay. Okay, so the we are progressing. The expected value is copyright 2024, which is our save component. But what we're receiving is this paragraph. So we can solve this in different ways. What I would do is to make it that instead of be exactly like that, to contain this thing. Let me check if there's an assertion that we can use instead of to be, to contain. And we can ask our model. We can ask here how can I check if a result contains this the past value instead of being exactly like that. So to contain. So to check if result contains a specific value, rather than being exactly equal to it, you should use to contain. So to contain. And now we can say npm run test unit. To contain. I think that someone is hallucinating. To contain. Are you sure? Are you sure to contain is a real assertion I can use? We can pass these docs. Yes, to contain. Expect result to contain blah blah blah. And result is a string. Okay. It's pretty sure about this. Okay, let's run this test again. To contain expected. You can see that there is a space here. Okay, that's why the tests are useful, because we can check exactly what's the expected value. And also the tests are great for documentation, because we can, by looking at the test, we can understand better how the block is supposed to behave. So we are having here a space. And if we run the test, now we are having another error. Okay, let me try something. So 2024. the received object should contain this. So this should pass. Okay, let me ask ChatGPT. Cursor, what's happening here? Any suggestions? Okay. Okay, so the save function actually returns a React element. Today I learned. Let me check this. Okay, let's debug this. Do you have time? Yes. Let's try to debug this. I think that if I how can we debug this? Okay, we have debug.json, we have debug. Okay. And they debug. What we do is this npm run okay, then we go to Brave and inspect, and we inspect, and what we get is this. And here we can run, and our tests properly stop when we want them to. If we just step over one, we can see that the result is actually a React component. So this is actually a React component. And here we can go to the console. So it's a React element. Okay. So we were doing this run. And we need to actually use the render function. So great. I don't need this anymore. We can disconnect this and we can stop this. Great. So what we need to do is the same that we did with the edit component. So we need to use the render. And what we can do here is we can container. So in this case, container is equal or save and this props. No, this props. And what we can do is expect container text content to contain this. Now npm run yay, and we can also how was this copyright component, copyright element. Okay, we need to finish the session. Let me just check one more thing before we finish. If we go to the save, yeah, I want to copy this. I want to verify that is the copyright and a space and then the date. So actually verify first this, it should fail because it's not exactly the same. But now I want to check this. Great. Okay, so I think that we have what we need. There are a few more things that we could do, but this is a good example of testing a block with the React components that are involved. So we have added tests for the registration process. We have added tests for the edit component and also for the save component. And here we can start adding a few more things. We have the testing library React that we can use. There are others like the screen that we can use the screen we can use it to test what's in the screen. So we can test the output, for example. And yeah, but yeah, this is a good example of adding unit tests for the React components that are involved in a block. And yeah, if anyone wants me to go deeper, I can do another session. If not, yeah, maybe we can continue with end-to-end tests, which would be this other way of testing a block. In this case, we are testing like the isolated elements, but then we can also test the block in a more realistic environment. We can use Docker and we can use end-to-end tests to automate what we do manually, and we can automate that. I mean, we can automate the process of adding a block and selecting it and adding properties and so on. Okay, so we are going to finish here. The recording will be available here in the streams, and yeah, so hello. So yeah, have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.